Take a seat. We'll get started with Alyssa here then, while we wait for our virtual panelists to come up. It's a pleasure having you here because, yes, Mayor Todd Garcia, or Todd Gloria, I should say, Mayor Gloria, announced a whole new raft of measures that San Diego is doing when it comes to increasing tree cover and others. And so, yeah, it's wonderful to have you here from our neighboring city of San Diego to talk about the aggressive new efforts that your city is making post-COP. So could you walk us through some of those?
Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm Alyssa Muto. I am the Director of Sustainability and Mobility at the City of San Diego. Yeah, we had a very big week last week. At COP26, Mayor Gloria did announce quite a few climate-focused measures, many of them having to do with mobility. So I'll kind of hit the high notes, the highlights. Among those announcements were the City of San Diego will be divesting our investments into fossil fuel companies and making those commitments by the end of the year. We also joined the Race to Zero, and we're really proud to be partners with many notable cities worldwide in that effort to move to carbon neutrality as a city. Very exciting. And we have identified our own fair share targets to work towards in that 2030 horizon. We have also signed on to the ZEV joint declaration that the UK initiated. So very excited to be able to broaden our scope and our perspective around mobility as we move into our climate action plan update. And the headline for that is we are moving to carbon neutrality in 2035 as a city. We had identified 6 strategies to do so, as well as over 100 actions to meet specific targets for reductions of greenhouse gas emissions in sectors of decarbonization of our built environment, land use and mobility, solid waste and the circular economy, and then of course sequestration. So looking at all of the options out there, but also not stopping with what we know today and looking at what might come online and what needs to come online in the next 10 to 15 years.
Great. Well, quick follow-up while our virtual panelists are still logging on. In that list of actions, what are the highest priority mobility actions are you taking? I'm curious if you've sort of quantified already that these are going to be the biggest levers that we can move the most aggressively on. So what's sort of the transport focus for that?
Yeah, so we have in our strategies, we have a land use and mobility. And by the way, our last climate action plan, 2015, also when Mayor Gloria was the interim mayor in the city of San Diego, very ambitious for its time, set a mode share goal of commuters within our transit priority areas to shift to 50% alternative transportation. So with transit, biking, pedestrian, or a combination thereof. And then the other 50% in single occupancy vehicles. With this update to our climate action plan, one of the biggest levers is to look more broadly at mobility and not just limit it to the commute. Commutes are just a fraction of our mobile source emissions. So really thinking about every mile that and every time we get into a car, how do we do it differently? Can we trip chain? Can we reduce on the weekends? Maybe we can telecommute or work from home. Making those daily decisions can contribute. And so spreading that responsibility citywide is a big lever that we've identified. The other is with electric vehicles. So focusing on how we transition our fleet in our municipality, but also how do we help our residents, especially those in underserved communities, also transfer over to electric vehicles.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was going to say one of our partners here at CoMotion Circuit has been doing some great work in shared electric vehicles in San Diego for quite a while. So some great examples. Well, I see our virtual panelists have joined us. Thank you so much. We have joining us from London is Shirley Rodrigues. She's the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. And then, of course, joining us from Milan is Manuela Ojan, who's the Head of Environmental Transition at AMAT, or AMAT. I also posed my first question to the Deputy Mayor, Shirley Rodrigues, about London, the low emission zone. Obviously, we heard from Minister Harrison talking about the raft of initiatives that the UK is doing. But one of those I'm particularly bullish on is what we can do in terms of congestion pricing, what we can do in terms of ultra emission zones, and really sort of use sticks in addition to carrots to really enforcing lower carbon emissions. So yes, Mayor Rodrigues, if you could talk a bit about how the ultra low emission zone works, separate from, of course, the congestion pricing zone, which has been there for 20 years, and what this expansion means and sort of how you're going to use this as a tool to really rein in carbon emissions.
Hello, and thanks for inviting me to speak and to give you a little bit of a sort of introduction in what we're doing in London, in particular the ultra low emission zone. So it is an emissions charging scheme. So it's not a ban, and it's not it's meant to encourage people to change their vehicles. And we started out in central London in 2019 in the very sort of in the same area, coterminous with the congestion charging zone. And it was very successful. We saw emissions being reduced by almost a half at roadside, which is in a few years, pretty amazing. But it is quite a small area. And what we've done in a couple of weeks ago on the 25th of October is expanded that 18 times its size. So now it covers the whole of central London, 3.8 million people, and covering 380 square kilometres. So that's about a quarter of London, and it's the largest zone of its kind in Europe. And the reason we've done that, why Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, wanted to really focus on accelerating the introduction of the ultra low emission zone and then expanding it, was because of the health benefits, bringing cleaner air to millions more Londoners within the city, both within that zone, that expanded zone, but also outside of it. The zone operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year, except for Christmas Day. It meets very tight standards. So the tightest standards we have based on European standards. So Euro 6 for diesel, Euro 4 for petrol. And that's sort of typically vehicles older than 6 years for diesel and about 15 for petrol would then be subject to the charge. And the charge is £12.50 a day if you're a polluting vehicle. Alongside of that, we've also tightened the low emission zone, which already existed in London for years beforehand, which is a standard for heavy vehicles. And we tightened that in March as well. So that's, again, looking at a Euro 6 standard. So this is a massive difference in terms of emissions-based charging in London. And the reason we're doing it is, as I said, because of air pollution, to bring health benefits to millions of people, but it's also helping us to put London on a path to make London a net zero carbon city by 2030. And the Mayor is absolutely clear this is a social justice issue. It's not just an environmental issue or a health issue. The poorest Londoners are going to be helped. Actually 6 out of 10 households in that sort of inner London area don't even own a vehicle, and they're the ones that are most subject to the air pollution that we experience in London. And I think just alongside of it, you talked about sticks, but actually the carrot was giving people enough warning that it was going to be brought in, which is why we did a lot of consultation when the Mayor was elected first time in 2016. And then we did a lot of consultation about the design of the scheme. We started out in central London, but did say that we were thinking of expanding it out. And then again, we consulted on that expansion. And then when the Mayor stood for re-election earlier this year, he stood on that platform and came back with the biggest mandate that I think any politician in the UK has got. So, and what we did do also was bring in scrappage schemes. So £61 million worth of funding to help small businesses, charities, people on low incomes to scrap their older, more polluting vehicles and use the funding to contribute to either purchasing another vehicle or using it, to use on the London Underground bus network or whatever. And that's helped remove over 12,000 polluting vehicles from our roads. And it's the single biggest program in the UK, and that's also helped drive carbon emissions down. So these are massive differences. As I've said, 44%, nearly 50% reduction in roadside nitrogen dioxide concentrations, about 6 to 9% reduction in carbon emissions as well. And the greatest thing that we've seen is people change their behaviour when they know it's coming in. So when we talked about bringing it in, the ultra low emission zone, the expanded version, we had about 39% of vehicles complying with the standard that we were proposing to bring in. The day that we launched, it was 87%. So many people got ready well beforehand because we gave them enough time and those incentives as well. And it showed, I think, that people had really understood the sort of perniciousness of air pollution and how toxic that is, stunting children's lungs, asthma, cancer, all of those sorts of things. So, really, really sort of, and it's sort of impressive, I think, effort by Londoners to really help comply. So I think I'll leave that there, but I think that's really where, what we've done. And then I think, we would recommend, those clean air zones being brought in, across the country where it's needed.
Well, we'll come back to that, obviously, because this is really impressive. Because Manuela, I want to turn to you because obviously Milan, early in the pandemic was one of the cities that made the most aggressive moves in converting street space to more human and active mobility. But Milan has been a long time leader in congestion pricing in this. And also and by say I know, I mean Bruce Sterling, the author who lives in Torino, often posts maps of air pollution levels across northern Italy, still a center of industry. So I know air quality is a major issue, I would assume, for Milan as well. So I'm curious about what echoes you hear in London's plans and how your own plans going forward to move forward with congestion pricing, conversion of streets to active mobility and other programs that you plan to come out of COP with.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to speak here. First of all, on behalf of the city of Milan, I would like to thank the city of London and the city of Los Angeles, with whom we are working together. We are strong partners, particularly in the C40 city network. About Milan, with respect to London, Milan is a rather small city. We are only 1.4 million people, reaching 3.2 million people with the metropolitan area. By the way, we are considered to be the economic capital of Italy and the driver for economy. This is why also we attract many commuters and tourists. But we have some very specific challenges in Milan, mainly due to the fact of our location and of the climate. So the level of pollution are extremely high, especially in the winter season. There is not really much wind, and so the quality of air is really poor. That's why Milano is now, since many years, rethinking its own approach to development and environmental transition. And this is also particularly happening after the COVID. So we are really fighting to improve the condition of the people living in the city and also the tourists and the commuters. And since traffic is the main responsible for air pollution, we consider that, especially if we look at dust, the so-called PM10, almost 50% of the responsibility of the PM10 emission is from traffic. That's why we think that having a road pricing together with a low emission zone in the city is the best option currently to try to solve both the problem of air quality and of mobility. Indeed, we tested two different types of road pricing measure. We started a little bit later than London. We started in 2008 with the so-called EcoPass scheme. That was indeed a kind of pollution charge. This was covering the center of a city, the internal ring of the city, about 8.2 square kilometers. And we then applied an entrance charge related to the pollution emission level of the vehicle. At the very beginning, the measure was really effective. We reached minus 20% of traffic drop. But over the year, the measure was less and less effective because there were more and more cars that were exempted from these restrictions. So we had a referendum in 2012. So we asked our people if they agreed to make this measure stronger. And the 79% of the voters were in favor of having more restrictions. So we tried on one side to enhance the public transport and alternative mobility opportunities, but on the other side, we extended the road charge to all vehicles. So all vehicles except the zero emissions, so the electric or hybrid vehicles are supposed to pay for a daily ticket. It's around €5. And so we have this restricted traffic zone that is controlled electronically by 43 access points. And where we have, of course, some cameras that are monitoring the entrance to the area. Our system is not in place every day, but during the weekdays, so Monday to Friday from 7:30 to 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And you pay the ticket and you can use it all over the day. About the freight transport, that of course is one of the most impacting in terms of pollution, there is a forbidden access during the peak hour, so from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. In the morning. We experience really good benefits from applying this road charge. By the way, the area where we apply this road charge is called Area C area, so it's the center of the city. And of course, benefits have been recognized by our citizens. First of all, huge decrease in traffic congestion. The public transport speed, of course, has increased. And also the occupation of the parking areas on the surface has decreased. Less road accidents. Of course, reduction of emissions of around 50% in the central area of the dust PM10 emissions. And of course, the town center is now more attractive for the visitors, but also for the people living there. And by the way, this is a charge, so we get some revenues and we can reinvent these revenues for mobility services. In addition, in 2019, we also added an LTZ zone, so a low traffic zone that is an area broader, and indeed it's covering the border of the municipality. And we have called this area Area B. In this area, you don't pay for any charge, but there are restrictions about the vehicle that can enter this area. So there is no entry for the most polluting vehicles, especially for diesels, from Monday to Friday, again, 7:30 a.m., 7:30 p.m. And there are also restrictions for bulky vehicles that don't have access during the day hours. They can only enter during the night. So our ambition there is to reach diesel-free Milan by 2030. About citizen engagement, we indeed were able to get the support of our citizens and engage them, especially through many opportunities for public debate. And also there was a strong leadership from our mayor that indeed has been recently re-elected, which indeed makes some campaigns to raise the awareness and also to promote these two-step measures that we have applied to our city.
That was great. I particularly note the mayor winning re-election that his opponents tried to make his transformation of the center city a wedge issue, and voters resoundingly rejected it. That is something they very much wanted. Well, I'll stop you there because, pardon me. So Alyssa, when are you going to ban cars from the center of San Diego? I mean, I'm learning so much from this here. Like, obviously you need to create an 80 square mile ban on cars in the city of San Diego. Slightly more practically, or at least at a more practical rate of change, I am curious about your thoughts on exactly these incredibly ambitious programs in both London and Milan, and how we can start to implement this really, I mean, the details of these programs, which used incentives and regulation in parallel to create that change, is really powerful. And it's also struck me what London's doing with the Cash for Clunkers program. I mean, we've seen in the States, obviously, due to the chip shortage, people have been buying older cars, more polluting, et cetera. So there have been all sorts of misaligned incentives. And so I'm curious, how can we start to do this in a US context, particularly in, one of America's most beautiful cities?
Yeah, well, thank you. And, CoMotion, this is why we're all here, so we can hear from each other and gain ideas. The deputy mayor mentioned a lot about incentives and starting with incentives and people moving forward on their own accord well in advance. And then I also like the example from Milan with the ideas around certain types of vehicles are permitted in an area, so you're not fined or there's no fee, but there is a practicality to address the air quality issues, which directly overlap and align with our reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So San Diego, the region, our city, we're probably not there yet, because right now our focus is about getting a well-connected transportation system that is safe, convenient, affordable, and enjoyable for everybody. That needs to be our primary focus, because at the end of the day, people just want to get from A to B. And so we need to create those mobility options. We're not yet there to take them away because you need to have that transportation system. We're very fortunate. Our MPO, Sandag, has been leading a regional effort to update our regional plan. And the regional plan isn't just focusing on mobility, it's pairing mobility and land use. And it is going to be those collective decisions about how we create complete communities, neighborhoods that where you can walk or ride a bike or take transit to get to schools, libraries, fresh fruits and vegetables, to get to places to congregate. We're doing a lot around a program called Spaces as Places. So it's taking our public areas and making them real places of community and activity so that you don't have to travel far and wide to get that benefit and that experience. So those are just some of the ways. And you know, the federal funding that's coming down, that's going to be huge in helping us to start to move forward to realize those investments that we need to make into our transportation system to increase headways, decrease headways, but increase transit availability and the system to then repurpose some of our rights of way for those active transportation and transit uses so that they can be as efficient and as safe for users to choose.
Great. Well, one thing I want to get into, and I think in the spirit of this being an international and hybrid panel, we're going to try to open up to audience questions in just a little bit, and we'll do our best to capture. If anyone out there on our audience on the internet is watching this, if you want to leave questions in Q&A in the format, we'll try to capture those too. But first, I'm going to go because obviously, you know, a big theme of this session, and one of the things that of course struck me out of COP26 is like, you know, COP is an extremely high level, you know, federal government to government torturous negotiations. And, you know, here at New Cities, obviously we believe that cities learning from each other is faster, and really cities are the front line of climate change. So I want a question here. Like Los Angeles, of course, Mayor Eric Garcetti was the chair of C40. He's handed off that chair to Mayor Khan in London. And so Shirley, if you could talk, I mean, what's Mayor Khan's priorities from a C40 standpoint in terms of, yeah, basically sharing what London has already done, how we can sort of advance the pace of sharing knowledge between cities to sort of advance these policies. So I'm curious if you have your thoughts there, because Manuela referenced that as well. Obviously, Milan is a very strong signatory to that, and I want to hear her thoughts too. But yeah, Shirley, what's the agenda for C40 from Mayor Khan's perspective?
It's building on the work that Mayor Garcetti has started, and obviously we have been working very closely with Mayor Salah, who led the sort of Green New Deal work at C40, and really the sort of transportation agenda, the climate agenda, is really about how do we help our cities rebuild from the economic and social impacts of the pandemic, and in a way that really supports that sort of Green New Deal approach, a sort of fair and just transition as we tackle the climate crisis. In terms of Sadiq's priorities, you know, he's absolutely clear that he wants to tackle both the twin dangers of air pollution and climate change. You know, we know that air pollution is the world's greatest environmental challenge, like climate change. Every citizen, you know, if you look at the World Health Organization limits, we are all breathing in polluted air. And, you know, from the PM 2.5, it's pretty much 99%, if not 100% of the world, which is absolutely terrible, and especially when you know what the health impacts that has. But we do know that many of the solutions to tackle air pollution will also help tackle climate change and vice versa. And we've got very good experience in London of sort of enacting those sort of policies like the congestion charge, or the work that we've been doing on electric vehicle charging, or e-scooters, or the ultra low emission zone, in fact. But we don't have the monopoly on actions or solutions. So we want to be really clear that the C40 is absolutely the network that really shares best practice and helps people learn from each other, not reinvent the wheel. So Sadiq wants to use his position as C40 chair to really enhance that knowledge sharing, but both within the sort of 97 megacities that form part of C40, but beyond. You know, we know that many cities, over 1,000 cities, have signed up to Race to Zero, and many of those are obviously not part of C40, but are part of other networks or not part of the networks, and they have committed to really halving their emissions by 2030 to make us, on track for the Paris Agreement 1.5C, limit in global temperature rise. So how can we use our experience and our knowledge to share that experience is something that he's very clear on. And one of the things that we want to promote, for example, is the thing that really helped us with making the case for the ultra low emission zone, and then sort of the byproduct of that was, helping to tackle climate change, was understanding what the problem is. Air pollution is an invisible killer. So what we introduced was a monitoring program in London with sort of local real-time air pollution monitors, partly funded initially by a philanthropy, now taken up by the mayor. And that is helping to, for local people, we have groups like Mums for Lungs or Choked Up or schools and others to understand what is the air pollution in their area, and either helping them manage their exposure by finding different routes or whatever, or actually to lobby and campaign for action. And that really helps make the case for us to take that ambitious action like some of the climate action or air quality action that we've been taking. So the mayor wants to help roll that out. So we'll be looking to support that rollout to cities within the C40. The other area that he wants to focus on, and I mentioned that, that 6 out of 10 households in London don't own a car, but are experiencing the impacts of that toxic air pollution by people driving, is looking at inequalities. And we know on climate change, for example, that the frontline countries and cities are the ones in the global south, the ones, again, least to blame for causing climate change, but the most severely affected. So again, by taking that sort of Green New Deal approach, he's committed that 2/3 of the next C40 budget, annual budget, will be going to support global south cities to try and redress that sort of adaptation and resilience issue, which COP sort of acknowledged, but didn't really go far enough, that whole loss and damage discussion that was had there. And we also want, of course, national governments to allow cities to do more. Certainly in the UK, we only have control within London for around half of the sort of emission sources and the emissions caused in London. But equally, government cannot meet their own targets, the NDCs, without all the cities helping to contribute to that. So we're arguing for them to give us more funding, devolve more funding and more powers to enable us to take further and faster action. And actually all the commitments that governments make will be delivered mostly in cities, huge centres of population and consumption, the production of emissions. And this is where, local people are demanding action. We saw that the increased mandate for action for both Mayor Salah and Mayor Khan on taking action on traffic, for example, and air pollution. And certainly we've seen polling in the UK that actually belie what government is saying. Many people are saying they recognise climate change is happening now. They want the government to go further and faster. And they want us, mayors and deputy mayors, businesses and others to actually be helping them with the problem and not relying on them just to do, to solve it by little changes. They want systemic changes, but they also want help so that they can take action too. So that's some of the sort of areas that we're going to be working on. But I think the message really for all the cities, that whether we're in C40 or not, is we've got to bring those commitments to life. We have to take urgent action and deliver solutions. And cities like Milan, like San Diego, I met Mayor Gloria, yes, at COP. Amazing actions that people are taking, and collectively we can really make a difference to reduce that sort of global temperature rise that we're seeing around 2.4 degrees, back down to that 1.5 that we need.
Wonderful. I want to call out one thing, because I think you mentioned it as if we knew, but in case you hadn't seen it, the World Health Organization recently ranked the air quality in cities, and 95% of cities on the planet failed. Like every city is failing at air pollution. And the other one that stands out, we mentioned the global south, is that air pollution now kills more people in sub-Saharan Africa than hunger does. So that it is a major issue there. Manuela, if you could talk a bit about this, obviously committed to C40 as well, but particularly again, as I mentioned earlier in the pandemic, Milan quickly put in a whole plan of how to rethink its streets, and also put in subsidies for electric vehicles, all sorts of great initiatives. And I'm curious about how other cities have learned from that, and how you're using C40 and other networks as a way to basically, take these great developed plans and help disseminate them. Because in the States, and we'll come back to Alyssa in a moment, like a lot of the initiatives that popped up for humanizing streets, have now popped down because of various budgets. So there's still a lot of sharing and dissemination to be done. But I'm curious, Manuela, how does sort of C40 fit into Milan's plans, and how are you using that network to share your innovations as well?
Yeah, in particular, we signed a few of the C40 declaration, and one of these declaration is the Green and the Healthy Street Declaration. That is the one really focusing on the topic of mobility and on the topic of air pollution. So the intent of signing this declaration is that was to ensure that the streets are safe, accessible, but also they are clean for air pollution. So the intent was to improve the quality, as said before, of life of our citizens, as well as tackle the topic of climate change. Milano adopted the approach of promoting walk, bike, and for citizens be active. We are not so much talking about autonomous vehicle, but we are relying on our citizens and are trying to develop as much as possible urban-centered mobility patterns. We are proud to say that we have one of the biggest pedestrian areas, at least we think in Europe, that is already dating since a few years. Part of this project was to promote also the carbon-free public transport and the fossil fuel-free public transport. We will have a completely electric vehicle for public transport fleet by 2030. Already today, we have introduced electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, mainly for buses. But this is what was already planned a few years ago. But due to COVID, we faced some kind of challenges because we realized that people were afraid of contagion, so they didn't really like to use more public transport. So we had to find a way out to manage the mobility and air quality problem, and on the other side, the pandemic. This means we had to put in place a so-called adaptation strategy 2020. And the main purpose of this was to rethink the timetables of the city and the rhyme, is it correct? The rhyme of the city. So reducing on one side the demand for public transport, and on the other side to promote what we call the different forms of soft mobility. We are really proud, for example, to have fast increase our cycling lanes. In 12 months, we were able to add 67 kilometers of biking lanes. We extended our 30 kilometers per hour zones in the city, covering almost all what I mentioned before, the area B. So the LTZ area of the city is now more or less completely 30 kilometers per hour. And we try to increase the pedestrian and public spaces, mainly reclaiming them from crossroads or open air parking lots. This program was called the Piazze Aperte, so open plazas. I think this is very well known now, it's getting common also in other cities. So the idea is to have in each neighborhood some walking distance, promote the walking distance life, the 15 minutes areas, and creating spaces for people to enjoy their free time and free space. We launched the program for the open plazas in 2018, and we will have now, by the end of this year, around 40 of these open streets. Also, we try to improve the shared mobility, but I think this is also very common also in other cities. So now we have shared mobility for fleets of cars, for cargos, for scooters, and for bikes. Last but not the least, about logistics. Even there, of course, we are promoting zero emission logistics and try to change our distribution models, especially with what relates with the last mile of the distribution and of the city.
Manuela, I'm going to stop you there in the interest of time because we're working some questions. But that is like an incredible laundry list of initiatives, which comes back to this of the incredible work that Milan has done, and also reminds me, Minister Harrison quoted Alvin Toffler in her talk, but particularly what Milan and Paris did and others during the crisis reminded me of Milton Friedman, that in a crisis, people turn to ideas that were lying around, and like having these ambitious agendas that could finally be implemented very rapidly because of the crisis. Not a silver lining per se, but still fascinating. But I want to turn back to the U.S. domestic context. Alyssa, Mayor Suarez mentioned, obviously, he's going to chair the Conference of Mayors. Mayor Secretary Buttigieg was a mayor. I'm curious, what other cities did you look to in putting together your climate plan, or what are some of the ambitious agendas that you're seeing around there? What is San Diego learning from its peers around the states, and how are you also talking to cities in terms of how to more aggressively move your plans forward?
Yeah, so we definitely have looked far and wide, international and in the United States, for where we need to go. I think the science is telling us where we need to go as well. We are very fortunate to be in California, where our state has leaned in, doing a lot of the lift, as we are on national meetings about building decarbonization and with CEQ and talking about where we go from there. It is much easier in California than it is in other states for other cities. So definitely banding together in California with our other California cities, and always the friendly competition doesn't hurt, of who can do it best and first. And then really, I think we have many initiatives. So not just with the climate action plan, not just with the bottom line of carbon neutrality, but how do we do land use and mobility policies better? And for that, we look
Do you hear? Shirley, do you hear any noise?
I'll just type to you. I can hear you, but not anybody else. So I'm not quite sure what's happened.
We have been disconnected.
Maybe.
They are on mute.
I think they've just gone on mute. I'm not quite sure why. I wonder if you can unmute them. No. Anyway, I've emailed them, but let's see.
Difficulties, but Alyssa.
Yes, so in San Diego, we have, concurrent with our climate action plan update, we have a resiliency plan that we have put together that is moving forward in parallel with our climate action plan, and really thinking about how do we ensure the resiliency of our infrastructure. We are a coastal city. We are a binational city or a binational region. So thinking about how do we ensure that through coastal flooding and or high precipitation events, so those channelized floodings, how do we protect and ensure that multimodal circulation is protected, not just circulation for vehicles and for freight and service, but how do we ensure that our transit can continue, that you can still bike or walk to work even in kind of the long-term scenario of those effects of climate change.
Thank you. So Shirley and Manuela, the question was, we've talked a lot about, of course, air pollution and carbon emissions mitigation, but the question was, how does your transportation policies help with resilience, of course, against climate disasters or increasing climate strain? So I don't know, Shirley, if you would like to take that first.
Yeah, it's absolutely an issue that we're all facing. So I talked about, Sadiq talking about how global South cities are on the front line, but everywhere is seeing the impacts of climate change, that we've already built in, locked in. And in London, we had a couple of surface water flooding events that really knocked out some of our tube stations, many homes affected, hospitals, and so on. So we have pulled together a sort of round table to look at two areas. One is, how do we deal with the emergency response system, which, we have quite a good one, but, there were bits that were sort of a bit creaky and didn't work as well. So how do we basically ensure that we can respond more tightly to these things? Because we know that they are going to, they're going to happen, it's inevitable now. And I think one of the biggest problems we have is making people aware that this risk is a very real risk, and it's not something that we can solve. It is really about how do we prepare people to deal with these things and adapt their behaviors or their homes or how they do business, so that we can minimize risk to life and limb and also to the impacts on infrastructure. We're also looking at longer term impacts, which is for us, there's a disparity of roles and responsibilities spread out amongst various actors. So actually the Mayor of London does not have any control over the sort of resilience or sort of surface water flooding management. That is done through our local authorities, some of our water utilities, and an environment agency. So again, it comes back to a coordination issue and a big funding problem, in that the focus has really been on sort of fluvial river flooding or sea level sort of incursions around the country, but actually surface water is the thing that is really impacting. So we have a number of, we have a long-standing climate adaptation strategy in London. We have a climate change partnership that is looking at, for example, how can we develop early warning systems, better communications, more granular information on, we know, the number of homes and infrastructure that are affected, 200,000 homes, for example. What we don't know is the detail of who they are, where they are. And then I think, a bit like in New York, the worry is because we are big cities with a very transient population. Every time you sort of try and contact people to alert them of sort of issues, they move on. So you're having to keep that going all the time. And in terms of sort of broader resilience, we're trying to build that into our homes, lots into our sort of transport system or into the city. So we're well protected against sea level rise with the Thames Barrier. We protected land for a second Thames Barrier that may be needed, sort of later on this century because of sea level rise. But for things like surface water flooding, we're doing much more on surface, on sustainable urban drainage, for example, both for, sort of building that into our road network, but also, for example, we just launched a program to support making our schools resilient. So working with the most impacted 100 schools of the sort of 1,000 or so in London, because when those schools are knocked out, the kids lose schooling days, and that all adds up as well. And I'm not touched on, for example, overheating, and we're also at the time of the London Olympics, we were only like a month or two away from rota cuts, which is sort of not allowing people to sort of have water, but just doing it on a rota basis, because we're actually a very dry city. So on overheating, we've done things like set up cool spots, sort of designated areas where people can go in overheating events to because we don't have air conditioning so much in the city. So lots there basically that we're trying to do, but yeah, we have a lot more to do.
Thank you. We're nearly out of time, but Manuela, would love to hear as well in terms of how how these changes to Milan streetscape will also bolster its resiliency in an era of climate change as well.
So what we try to do is to have one overall document that is our air and climate plan. So we put the two topics together in one strategic document for the city of Milan. So our air and climate plan that will be soon approved by the City Council is the instrument aimed at reducing on one side the air pollution of the city, but also taking care of mitigation and climate adaptation for the city. And in this plan, we also tried to comply with some key principles for us as a city of the right to health, equity, and justice. And we take also the priority criteria of social inclusion and the protection of the vulnerable people as a priority. This plan also is kind of transversal with other plans that were developed before. So with the Sustainable Mobility Plan, the Resilience Plan, and the Urban Planning Regulation. So it's trying somehow to put some order within all the plans and programs already developed by the municipality. And there are 5 main objectives in this plan. One is really specific to the municipality, and is the so-called connected and accessible Milan. One is on more energy, so it's the positive energy Milan, and one is on the cool Milan. Cool refers to the topic of adaptation to climate change, so having a cleaner, cooler, and more livable cities. And in this specific topic, we take care of aspects such as I said, having a green city, greener city, taking care of water-related issues, because we are experiencing floods events, especially in winter. And this is for us an opportunity to take all these aspects into consideration. And while we were preparing this air and climate plan, we went into depth with studies about historical past events related with climate impact that, as said in our case, is mainly heavy droughts in summer season, strong heat waves, for example, or flooding. And based on the historical experience and with a kind of modeling exercise, we projected the expected impacts in the future. And based on the forecasting, we are taking action also related with the urban planning of the city. And all these aspects are covered in our strategic plan.
Wonderful. Well, we're gonna have to leave it here. I would say my big takeaway from this session, of course, is that a mobility plan is a climate plan, is a resilience plan, is a land use plan. All of, again, the linkages between these, having to design holistic frameworks for all of it. And then as pointed out, the cities, of course, are where these plans will be executed. So thank you so much for your incredible details. And I would love to keep this going for another hour, but I've just realized how late it is getting in Milan and London. So thank you for joining us this evening from your time. It's a surreal experience to be able to have you, like you feel are in the room here, for me at least, having you on monitor in front of me, but realizing you are half a world away. So thank you, Deputy Mayor Rodrigues. Thank you, Manuela. Thank you, Alyssa, for coming here from all the way from San Diego. We really appreciate you having joining us as well. And let's have a round of applause for our panelists. I will hold on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for joining. For the audience here in physical space here in Los Angeles, now is a new tradition that we're having here called brunch. So we have an hour break here for your brunch plans on this Thursday afternoon, and then yes, we'll see you back on the main stage at 12:15. And if you're really interested in congestion pricing and ultra low emission zones, we're gonna have a special session this afternoon called "The Price of Everything," looking at new technologies for this. So thank you all again. Thank you all again, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.